January 13th, 1980. A park ranger tells his colleague he's stepping out for a 2-hour hike. He doesn't take a radio, he doesn't take water. He just walks out the door. He is never seen again. No body, no struggle, no footprints. Search teams combed 12,000 acres and found absolutely nothing. But back at his house, nothing was missing. Not his cash, not his guns, not even the truck he was restoring. Weeks later, a witness under hypnosis described a truck with Paul slumped unconscious between two strangers. That lead went nowhere. So did the next one, and the one after that. This is the only national park ranger in history to vanish on duty and never be found, dead or alive.
Chiricahua National Monument, Arizona. 12,000 acres of volcanic rock spires so strange, locals call it the Wonderland of Rocks.
It's a maze of stone canyons that swallows sound and disorients even experienced hikers. The kind of place where a person could vanish and simply never be seen again. In January 1980, 41-year-old Ranger Paul Braxton Fugate worked here, a man who didn't quite fit the buttoned-up Park Service mold. Years earlier, the Park Service had actually fired him for pushing the boundaries on grooming standards, his hair and mustache too long for the uniform code. He fought it and got his job back. By 1980, Paul was well-liked, experienced, and knew every inch of this park. January 13th was a quiet Sunday. Visitor traffic was light. Around 2 in the afternoon, Paul told a colleague he was going to check the nature trail near Faraway Ranch. He left his radio behind on the desk. He didn't carry water. It was meant to be a short walk. Witnesses at the visitor center watched him walk out the door and head toward the historic Faraway Ranch buildings.
That was the last confirmed sighting of Paul Fugate, walking calmly, alone, in broad daylight. 2 hours passed, then 3. He didn't check in. By early evening, his colleagues realized something was wrong. Paul was never late without radioing in. A single missing ranger was about to become the largest search in the park's history. Within hours, a massive search was underway. The Cochise County Sheriff's Department, the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and volunteer search and rescue teams, all combing the same 12,000 acres. Foot teams combed the canyons, tracking dogs worked the trails, helicopters and small planes swept the rock formations from above. Investigators reportedly reached out to the FBI. The Bureau chose not to formally take on the case. The search stretched across days, then weeks, covering every canyon, every ridge, every hiding place. They found nothing, not a single footprint, not one torn piece of clothing.
It was as if Paul Fugate had never set foot on that trail at all, despite dozens of witnesses confirming he had. Investigators searched his cabin at the monument and his house in Tucson, and what they found only deepened the mystery. Nothing was missing. His wallet was untouched. $300 in cash sat exactly where he'd left it. His gun collection was still in the cabinet. His camera equipment sat untouched on a shelf. In the garage sat a Ford pickup he and his wife had driven home from the dealership nearly a decade earlier. Untouched, tires slowly going flat with time. People who vanish on purpose usually take something with them. Paul took nothing, not even his radio. On his desk, investigators found something unexpected, a half-finished life insurance application, as if he planned to return and complete it.
And then there was his wife, Dottie. She didn't arrive at the monument until 4 days after he vanished. Her home was never searched. Her alibi was never formally questioned. That gap in the investigation doesn't prove anything, but in a case with no body and no evidence, it left a door open that never fully closed.
Weeks after Paul disappeared, a lead emerged that seemed like it might finally break the case wide open. A park employee remembered passing a pickup truck on the road that same afternoon, but the memory was hazy, incomplete. Investigators brought in a hypnotist, hoping to pull sharper details out of the witness's memory. Under hypnosis, the witness described a dark green pickup truck with a camper shell moving along the road that afternoon. Inside the cab were two men, and between them, slumped over, sat a third man, apparently unconscious.
The driver had a thick beard and wore a black, white, and red plaid shirt. The other man wore a green jacket, the same color jacket Paul had been wearing that day. Some investigators believed this was the exact moment Paul was taken, captured by pure chance through the eyes of a passing stranger. Others were far more skeptical. The truck had passed at speed. The memory was recovered months later under hypnosis, notoriously unreliable in courts. But that same week, other rangers found something physical near Faraway Ranch, tire marks consistent with a sudden spin-out. Nearby, the ground showed signs that looked, to some, like a struggle had taken place. There was a reason this theory made sense to investigators. Cochise County sits close to the Mexico border, and in 1980, this region was a known corridor for drug trafficking.
If Paul had crossed paths with a smuggling operation that afternoon, his uniform alone might have made him a threat that needed to disappear. A remote park, built from land meant to hide things, had perhaps done exactly that. Years into the investigation, a completely different threat emerged, one that had nothing to do with trucks or hypnosis. One theory centered on a young man known to own a dune buggy, which he liked to drive through the desert with a friend from a local auto shop. Investigators wondered whether something had happened out there, whether Paul had crossed paths with them on one of those desert drives. About a month after Paul disappeared, the friend's father, who was also his business partner, purchased a 40-acre parcel of land just west of the monument at a price well above market value. The property held little more than a rundown shed and a hand-painted no trespassing sign. 2 years later, the land was quietly sold again, a detail that struck almost everyone who heard it as suspicious. Decades later, one investigator still wanted to search that specific parcel, this time with an FBI cadaver dog trained to find human remains. Instead, each new lead in the Fugate case only opened another door. Not everyone believed Paul was taken against his will. One retired investigator proposed a very different theory, that Paul walked away on purpose, deliberately leaving his radio behind, fed up with the rigid rules of the Park Service. It's a theory that has never fully gone away, but investigators suspected foul play almost immediately, and it struggles to explain the things Paul left behind. Why leave $300 in cash? Why leave a truck he cared for? Why leave paperwork half-finished, as if he intended to come back?
Years later, a letter arrived from an Arizona state prison that reignited the entire case. An inmate wrote that he had helped get rid of a park ranger who had stumbled into the middle of a narcotics operation. What unsettled investigators wasn't just the claim, it was the detail. He spelled Chiricahua correctly, a word even experienced agents sometimes got wrong. It was the kind of detail that shouldn't have been public. And yet, the lead went nowhere. No confession was ever verified. No remains were ever recovered. In July 1983, a Cochise County official went public, stating he believed Paul had been murdered and that the arrest of more than one person was imminent. That arrest never came. No one has ever been charged. The years passed. The search teams went home. The trail, quite literally, went cold. More than 8 years after he vanished, with no body ever recovered, Paul Fugate was legally declared dead.
In the years that followed, the National Park Service quietly requested that his widow repay certain benefits she had received. Dodie Fugate eventually settled in New Mexico. Decades later, no photographs of Paul remained visible in her home, but his old desk nameplate still sat on a shelf.
Eventually, Paul's family and former colleagues gathered at Chiricahua National Monument, the place he loved, to dedicate a memorial in his name. They placed a small plaque bearing his name and planted an apple tree beside it. Doty later explained why. Paul once had an unlikely friend at the park, a wild javelina he called Lone Pig, who loved apples and would lie on his porch listening to music, as long as it wasn't rock and roll. For years, she'd wondered why Paul kept buying so many vegetables. They were never for him. Paul's disappearance made national news within weeks.
A 1981 New York Times report noted investigators already suspected he'd stumbled into a drug operation active in the area. In 2009, a retired Park Service ranger named Rick Smith reviewed the case publicly, comparing it to other rangers who vanished in the backcountry and finding none stranger than this one. In 2018, nearly 40 years later, Cochise County Sheriff Mark Daniels and the National Park Service renewed the public appeal for information, tripling the reward to $60,000. Online true crime communities have picked the case apart for years, debating the truck, the land deal, and the letter. No one has ever agreed on an answer. The case remains officially open to this day. Somewhere in 12,000 acres of rock and canyon, or somewhere far beyond it, the answer to that Sunday afternoon still exists. It has simply never been found. Paul Fugate remains the only National Park Service ranger to vanish on duty and never be recovered, alive or dead. The trail ended. The truth didn't. If you have a theory of your own about what happened to Paul Fugate, leave it in the comments.
This is a case that has never stopped haunting the people who worked it. And if you want more cases like this one, subscribe. There are more files waiting to be opened.